Okay, well, welcome to the Poetry Box Live. I'm Shawn Aveningo Sanders, and I'll be your host for tonight's show. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, my husband Robert and I run a small boutique press here in Portland, Oregon, known as the Poetry Box. The Poetry Box Live is our way of supporting our talented authors to help them connect to their audience. You know, this past week marked the anniversary of when the world came to a stop. And we were all scrambling to figure out what this pandemic was all about and wondering how long it would last. And I think about where I was last year at this time and how many plans were put on pause. And I have to say, I'm really grateful that this thing called Zoom even exists. And it's allowed us to stay somewhat connected during these trying times. And with that said, I am very excited to present three fabulous poets for you today. We have Barbara Meier, who will be joining us from Colorado. We have Mark Thalman from here in Oregon. And we have Doreen Stock reading from Northern California. So let's get started with our first reader, Barbara Meier, author of Sylvan Grove. Barbara Meier traded the Midwest ocean of wheat for the Pacific Northwest in 1979. She married, had babies, and pretty much gave up on her dreams of acting and writing. 33 years later, she found herself alone, staring at the Pacific Ocean and writing poems again. She still wants to try to get back to the stage. Last year, she retired from teaching kindergarten and moved to Colorado to spend time with her mom. And wouldn't you know it, she was just in time for the COVID-19 quarantine. Please welcome Barbara Meier.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Shawn, for having me on. My book is not only about my childhood in Kansas, but it's also about going back to Kansas and Southwestern in Winfield 40 years later. So there's a lot of mixed emotions in this book. So it's appropriate that the first one I'm reading, I wrote in 1979 when I was a senior at Southwestern College in Winfield, Kansas. And my advisor was Dr. Dan Daniels, and this one's for him. Sylvan Grove. The temporal eternity, stones lie in their beds of grass. The grass slowly bends west, gray marble heads, the trees twisted where storms sought shelter. The prairie ascends, slowly bends up the slopes, transfixed at the headstones. A silent prayer of the prairie, so temporal, it's nothing else but eternity, a life worth living. So, growing up on the farm outside of Sylvan Grove, my mom was a nurse and she worked in a nearby town of Lincoln. So Dad, who was a farmer who was raising wheat and cattle and all that, was in charge of us girls, and he gave us some very important jobs. One of them was when he was hauling silage, he would drop us off at the gate and it would be open, and our job was to keep those cows from getting out. So this is called the Garden of Eden. The Garden to Eden is really only barbed wire fencing strung between crook-necked sticks, hinged to rust-streaked limestone posts bleeding on the prairie. A gate to keep the pasture in place for the cows and the children. To play among the devil's claw, sucking the dirt from the roots of the wild onions with purple flowers, or play hide and seek with the horny toads and the box turtles. At its tightest, saggy trousers, tattered shirts, the latch, a belt of baling wire, slick in my sweaty palms. Open, it flops in a hopscotch booby trap with barbs of steel poking the ground. We were sentinels of silage, hauled in a dying farmer's Ford pickup. Prairie angels with sunflower swords, keeping out all that is bad, escaping the wrath of rattlesnakes, fire ants, and sandburrs. The Garden of Eden before the fall. So my father died very young, I think, now that I look back at 42. And he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or also called Lou Gehrig's disease. And at that time, they don't know why they got it. There was no cure for it. Death was inevitable. So um, this poem's for him. The sunshine of beer. There's sunshine in the taste of beer, of a June wheat day, blonde grain kissing the cerulean blue sky, and 103 temperature baking the green enamel of a John Deere 55H combine. It is the smell of bread brewing on the prairie wind. The farmer, cabless with his Coors, babysitting his girls in the bin of the combine, perched above the churning gears. There were so many ways to die that day. In the jaw of the combine, sliding on the cracked vinyl seats without a seatbelt, riding the tipping truck dumping wheat at the grain elevator, hoping the elevator man would give us a stick of gum. OSHA never knew, and KCSL never cared about us sipping the last swallow of Daddy's beer. They never knew it was the farmer who died. Was it the pink mercury-treated wheat in the old JD seed drill? The Barbon carbine for the wild oats? Or was it the visit to Sasebo, Japan, swabbing the deck of radiation? Death blooms from the seeds drilled into the ground so long ago. We are harvested by the deed done wrong, the accidents unknown, the ignorance of greed. We become the brewed amber ale drunk down. Okay, so this next one's dedicated to my little sister Jan because she shared the same experience with me. My grandfather had a stroke and he was in Hays, Kansas at Hadley Hospital. We were in Salina. It was about a 3-hour drive, seemed to take forever. And then once we got there, there was nothing to do until we found out the acoustics of the basement in the hospital. This is based on one of my favorite hymns, Jerusalem the Golden. Jerusalem upon the plain. The radiancy is of wheat fields fed to the craw of a John Deere combine. The green against the gold honeyed fields and milky blue skies. The hills outside my car windows roll westward, flattening to shorn stubbled fields and shaggy carpets of blue-stemmed buffalo and switchgrass. The tedium of our wheels on Interstate 70. Sylvan Grove, Ellsworth, Russell, Victoria, Hayes. My eyes sink, fade to my cheek, resting against the hot glass. I contemplate. What bliss can be found in the plainness of the high prairies? What pastures of the sick shine with a glorious sheen? The halls of Zion in the basement of Hadley Hospital, where martyrs sleep in hospital beds, and sticky peanut butter girls behind urine green bathroom stalls belt angel songs, funneling through the heating ducts, conjubilant with song, a feast to shout among the ailing throng. It is a blessed country, sweet in death, a home to the elect. Our song of triumph resounds round floors, neath beds, and through IVs, and in comas and last breaths. It is Jerusalem upon the plains, a throne of golden wheat and milk and honeyed earth, the conquerors faithfully brought to rest upon the Armo plains, blood of earth and heaven pumping through our veins. We are little girls clothed in robes of white. The next poem, North Central Kansas is known for its post-rock limestone, and there were no trees, so they quarried the stone for fences and barns and houses and sidewalks. And there was a quarry on our farm, and I'm sure that my grandpa Bentrup helped quarry that stone. This one is dedicated to my grandpa Bentrup. building with post-rock limestone. The compression of the Kansas seas laid layers of dead, extinct creatures inches below, softly molded to layers of earth. The overburden peeled back like so much dead skin, a seam of solidified bone. Just as the seam was laid, so the father laid the fence posts. The man laboring in veins with auger, plug, and feather, dragging posts on wishbone sleds, tipping, tamping, stringing with wire. He built his family upon the plains, the weight of the rock bending his back in the years of children and grandchildren. We too could excavate the limestone rock with drill, plug, and feather like our father. We who are children of the plains, heavy memories solidifying when exposed to air. We tip and tamp our lives, layering the bones and seams of years. The fence seems derelict upon the prairie, rubble overgrown in dead tumble pigweed. The rock, the foundation, rests beneath the earth, while we who remain honor his name and labor not in vain. So, my grandma Meyer on my dad's side told me this story, and I always wondered if it was true. And about 2 years ago, I decided, well, you know what? I'm going to research this and see if it could happen. And sure enough, from what I found out, it's very, very likely that the story is true. So it is called Dedicated to the Southeast Section 34, Township 43 North, Range 19 West, inspired by William Carlos Williams. Of this plot of ground facing Haw Creek, the steadfast stones in the family cemetery hum of the vestiges lived on the prairie. Of Valeria Ernestine Wacker, who told her granddaughter a story about bushwhackers and raids on a farm in Missouri. A dour woman, a preacher's daughter, never smiling, speaking with German in her voice. The story told by her grandmother to her. Of Wilhelmine Caroline Tagmeyer, who married in 1863 in Cole Camp, Missouri, and lived on a farm in Morgan County, Missouri, cattywampus from Little Dixie, next door to Benton County. Of ruffians on horses, searching for whatever, wearing their fancy embroidered shirts, with long hair blowing, on fast rides and dismounts as they burned the barns, raided the smokehouses, upending tables, slashing furniture with their cavalry swords, storming a bedroom to flip the mattress for money or gold, not seeing the baby asleep on the patchwork quilt of greens, blues, browns, and rusty reds. Of the heart of a mother fearing the silence, of saving the baby from a feather mattress soft in its suffocation, or to wait to watch the plunging sword rip the feathers into a drift of bloody plumes. The sound of stomping boots, trailing flour and coffee, killing the cattle for supper. It was the Civil War, border ruffians, raids, and skirmishes on the Fisher family farm in the southwest quarter of the Southeast Section 34, Township 43 North, Range 19 West. I wonder now why she told this granddaughter this story. What I do know now, if you don't want to remember your grandmother's stories, yours don't count. So I went back to my 40th college reunion. Got to see my friend Cindy, who's out there. And I really had not been back in 40 years. I have mixed feelings about reunions. They stir up a lot of emotions and things, and hey, I write about it. This is a Haben minus prose. It's a Japanese style. gazing out at the Walnut Valley, remembering the 77 steps at Southwestern College, inspired by Richard Staw. I contemplate the steps sitting on the wall by Christie Hall, the maple trees scarlet and the geraniums in baskets, builder purple. A spider repels from tree to sidewalk crack, a deep canyon to trek, scurrying to the limestone wall. 40 years ago, I roamed this college hill, never went back till now. I left alone, I remain alone, a web between sunsets in lilac bushes. So I'm going to end with fragility. This is the way back on Interstate 70 after going through and seeing all of these places from my past. In the rusty patches of ripened sorghum along Highway 18, west of Sylvan Grove, I can see the trail back home under the forever sky. I stand solid like the limestone post rock at the corners of the field, watching the black Angus on the hills. At my feet, the pasture gourds nestle against the rubble from the road cut. The barbed wire snags and draws blood from my fragile skin of age. It's really not about the fragility. It's about the strength of the moment. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Barbara. I loved how you paint a picture of Kansas. My only association with Kansas, growing up in Missouri on the St. Louis side, in the suburbs, not really a farm girl, but I remember we would drive through Kansas to go to Denver on Highway 70, that long, straight, straight road. And you've really brought so much life to it that I didn't really experience as a teenager that was bored to tears. And I really have such an appreciation for this book because of that, because you've opened Kansas up to me. And I love that. So thank you for sharing your stories.
Thank you.
I love the thing about listening to your grandparents' stories and how we have to listen to them if we want anyone to listen to ours later on. So that's really fun. So thank you again for sharing. Our next featured poet is going to be Mark Thalman, author of Stronger Than the Current. Mark Thalman is also the author of Peasant Dance and Catching the Limit. His work has been widely published for 4.5 decades. His poems have appeared in the Patterson Review, the MacGuffin, Pedestal Magazine, and the Valparaiso Review. Mark received his MFA in creative writing from the University of Oregon, then taught English and creative writing in the public schools for 35 years. Now retired, he is the editor of poetry.us.com and lives in Forest Grove, Oregon. Please welcome Mark Thalman.
Thank you. Also, want to thank Shawn for hosting this. And also, of course, thank her for the great job she did on my book. This is Stronger Than the Current, and I got to paint the front cover, which I was delighted to do. Stronger Than the Current is in 2 parts, and the first section is called Some History. It's about the first half of the last century in logging in Oregon. And the first section opens with a quote from Ken Kesey's Sometimes a Great Notion. They say the first spar is the tallest, but that's all hokum. Everyone you climb is the tallest. The opening poem is Logging the Umpqua. I sink spurs into bark, pull the rope secure. The windmill sounds, trying to speak one word. Down the mountain, 2 field hawks, patient as gods, glide across the meadow to the far ridge. I use my axe, then saw, until the top leans, bending the tree like a stem of ripe wheat. When you hear the wood begin to crack, splinter, hold tight. That fir comes springing back. I ride the whipping sway. Below, branches snap. The crown explodes. Hundreds of years old, the moan. Many years ago, on my daily walks with my golden retriever, Sherlock, we would walk under some firs. And in these fir trees was a big branch that was dead. And I always kept my eye on that to make sure it didn't fall down and hit us. And those are called widowmakers. This next poem is Widowmakers. High in a fir, a dead limb. On the next breath of wind, call it chance, this branch breaks. If one of the logging crew gets clubbed, it's only 50-50 before they get up, if they get up. A hard hat can't ward off heavy artillery. If the top of a tree leans like a drunk, I'm not too proud to circle around. The hammer is cocked, fate pulls the trigger. Part 2 of the book is called The Daily Forecast. And every year my parents would drive from Eugene to Pendleton to see my grandparents on my father's side. Back in those days, it was an all-day trip because the interstate highways had not been built yet. They just didn't exist. And one of the places we would normally stop for dinner was Arlington on the Columbia River. This is called Arlington, Oregon, 1956. The railroad and highway snaked along the river. Up the slope, huge oaks shaded yards on blistering summer afternoons. In the evening, sun near town would fall into shadow, while the far side of Columbia still baked. Mom said, "This is the last time we will ever see this place. When the dam is finished, everything will be underwater like the castle in your fishbowl." I had visions of salmon swimming down streets and slipping through empty windows. Tugging her sleeve, "Will they move the trees?" "No," she said, and fell silent. After I wrote my first book, Catching the Limit, I realized I didn't have any poems about Eastern Oregon. So I decided to remedy that problem. And so this next poem is called Eastern Oregon. Out here, miles from anywhere, coyotes, cattle, and sun become your companions. Hills roll and fold, a sea of giant swells, then flatten out, lie calm in bleaching summer heat. When evening unveils its stars, life shrinks under the universe. For centuries, Nez Perce came to trade for Columbia salmon. Then pioneers snaked wagons down the Blue Mountains. Even today, dust devils coil up and rivers cut deep gorges. Sage grows low so wind can go where it wants, whistling through wire fences. I have a history degree, so I try to get a lot of history into my poems. And I also really like the last line of that poem because it rhymes 4 times and still makes sense, which for me is like hitting a home run. This being March, I thought it would be appropriate if I read you a poem named March Weather. The poem was rejected 29 times, so the 30th time was the charm. And that was over the course of 16 years. And of course, some years I just didn't even send it out. But last Saturday, it was republished in an online anthology called Your Daily Poem. And then a woman from Jacksonville, Florida, contacted me and wanted to make 40 copies. And I said, sure, great. And she wanted to give it to her clients for Meals on Wheels. So the bottom line is, if your poem has good ideas, keep revising, believe in the poem, be persistent, it really pays off. Not all poems take that long, but some do. March weather, rapidly approaching across forested hills, comes a crashing roar I have never heard before. I call my golden retriever and we run, trying to make it home before the blast. Reaching the front porch, hail, 12-gauge shot, pelts the ground, ricochets off, while the roof thunders thousands of hammers. I fix a cup of tea. Sherlock laps his water urgently. We listen to the storm begin to slacken, the ticking of ice, like someone throwing rice, a wedding of winter and spring. Technology isn't always what it's cracked up to be, just like trying to get on to read today. My computer wouldn't work right, so I'm on my cell phone. And if you go fishing, you need to watch where the osprey catch the fish. So that's where you can go to catch fish. And if you want to know what the weather is, watch for a herd of wild goats. The daily forecast. Early mornings, after the fog has risen, I watch for wild goats from my kitchen window. If they meander along the high ridges, the day will be clear and sunny. When the herd comes down to graze in the meadow, count on rain. Spotting them somewhere in between, I make my best guess depending upon which way they happen to be going. However, if they hide in the woods, a big storm, a heavy fist is about to hit. To predict the weather, I don't need a barometer, radar, or satellite dish. The goats are seldom wrong. The title of Stronger Than the Current comes from this next poem, and I think everyone needs to stay strong considering what we've just been through in the past year. And this poem has a rowboat in it, and everyone needs a metaphorical rowboat to get themselves by, like the character in this poem. This is called Mapleton. Every year, the mayor runs a contest to see who can guess the annual rainfall. After a few good storms, the Sayusla rises, drowning Helen McCready's prize tulips. The rowboat tied to her front porch is again useful. She has no intention of moving. Helen was born in this house, and so was her mother. Her patience is stronger than the current. From the back porch, she fishes for salmon. And Mapleton is east of Eugene towards Florence, if you ever want to visit there. And don't blink, because otherwise you'll miss it. It's a really small town. To the west of Forest Grove is where my wife and I live, or we live in Forest Grove, but to the west of us is the Tillamook Forest. And the average rainfall is 10 feet a year. And it's even more if you measure the rain on top of the mountains. So this is called rain country. And it rains a lot in Oregon. To say it rains in the Tillamook Forest is like saying the sun shines in the Sahara. Sometimes locals go crazy from the constant drip only summer can shut off. Winter days wash your psyche until it's wrinkled as skin that's been in the bath too long. Some say living here is torture. Others say they wouldn't have it any other way. In contrast to all that rain, the Tillamook forest had a series of fires that destroyed over 500,000 acres of old growth timber. And of course, we've had a lot of bad forest fires on the West Coast this year. There were 4 forest fires in the series spanning from 1933 to 1951. So this is the Tillamook Burn, 1933. Jagged as a king's crown, with a diameter of nearly 6 feet, the rings of this stump are impossible to count. A decayed tooth, the middle is hollowed out. Weathered gray as granite, the thick shell has become its own monument. A dark blaze stretching down one side testifies to where flames seared through, relic of a fire so hot, ash like snow piled a foot deep, fell on ships hundreds of miles out to sea. Violent winds created by heat, powerful as a hydrogen bomb, uprooted giant firs, vaporized streams, all caused by a logging cable scraping over bark, igniting a spark into timber. And my last poem is going to be about Forest Grove. This is called David Hill Road, and it's one of my favorite destinations to take our Shetland sheepdog for a walk. David Hill Road. Whoever owned this 54 Chevy sedan must not have been a mechanic or a conjurer who could raise machinery from the dead. Instead, too cheap to have it towed, the car rests in a traffic of weeds. Seed tufts poke through the grill like steam issuing from an overheated radiator. Plum trees blossoming form clouds of exhaust, while a blackberry vine, a policeman, taps at the driver's window. On clear summer nights, under the bright headlight of the moon, crickets hum a well-tuned engine. The Chevrolet appears to be speeding through the soft blue landscape into tomorrow, rushing into the future of its own slow decay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark. That was wonderful. And I have to say, since I'm not from Oregon, I've lived here for about 7 years now, I learned so much from this little book. I mean, so much history. And to present it as poetry, double bonus. So bravo. And I cannot believe that poem, March Weather, is the one that took 30 years to get published, you said? I'm like,
No, 16.
16 years, I'm sorry. 30, yeah, that was a little long. Because I love that poem. That was one of my favorite ones when I read through the chapbook the first time. So that's shocking to me that it took that long. But way to be persistent.
I think my poems always get better after they've been published.
Good point. All right. Well, our final feature tonight is going to be Doreen Stock. And Doreen Stock is the author of Bye Bye Blackbird. Hailing from Fairfax, California, Doreen is a poet, literary translator, and memoir practitioner. A prolific and widely published writer, Doreen's other works include Tango Man, My Name is Why, 3 Tales from the Archives of Love, Talking with Marcel, In Place of Me, selected poems with an introduction by Jack Hirschman, and The Politics of Splendor. She is also a founding member of the Marin Poetry Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome Doreen Stock.
Thank you so much. You can't judge a book by its cover, but you can judge a cover. And it's turned out so beautifully that I'd like to thank the pianist, Sophia Drozd, the photographer, Amy Stock Drozd, my friend, the artist, Susan Weissman, whose eye on all of my projects I appreciate, but most of all, the cover designer at Poetry Box, Robert R. Sanders, who not only read every poem to find the final image, but read the one on the dumping of the pianos several times in order to come up with this beautiful design. Thank you all. I dedicate this first reading of Bye Bye Blackbird to the memory of my mother, Annetta Winnick. For Annetta Diamond Winnick, 1918 to 2012. A balanced mind does not weigh incorrectly is what was written on your high school annual of the beautiful, serious young woman who stared out of its pages. Brilliance is what lasts, mother, polished by these years of loving and being loved. And strength. How were you strong enough to do that? I'm always asked. Always there's in your firm voice, echoing in my heart, calming fears, pointing me in new directions. Those who ask that question have never known you. I decided to open the book with a poem that I wrote many years ago in the 90s. My mother was collecting my mail for me at home, and I was living in Bedouin lands in a small development town called Arad. I got to watch the shepherds, the Bedouin shepherds with their camels and their sheep and their goats on hill after hill out of my window. And so I chose the first poem out of that collection, and it's called Bedouins Can Find Their Mothers. Bedouins can find their mothers. There are signs that only a daughter can read in the smallest portion of the eyes above the blackness, in the position of even 3 rocks on the slope at noon. There's a scent of flowers that were trampled and bent, like the shadow of a spine broken and then reformed, that the Bedouin daughter can read. The next poem came from a dream I had in my mother's last year, preparing me for our separation. I tried to render it in this poem exactly as I experienced it in the dream. It's called Mother Horse. Long ago, when mothers were horses with their big hearts against our small heads, we were calm next to their giant bodies, and nothing was too hard for them to do. They could lift us onto their backs and run into the night sky, never ever leaving behind us behind. Long ago, when we could feel them around us, and they would bend their heads down to drink of still waters, and we were warm and safe. Then came a time like Guernica, and they were terrified and white with anguish, their big blue teeth bared in tragic ways, their necks arched to the breaking point by the cruel harness of pain. And then we were forced to lead separate lives, and we longed for them as they streaked through our dream. They roamed the worlds in search of us, and we could hear them whinnying across the abyss of ice and black water that we would have to cross if we were to ever find them again. My mother lived in Palm Springs, California. And every summer she would avoid the heat with my father, and they would pilgrimage up to Marin County and stay in a local hotel. But one summer, towards the end of her life, she got caught up here with a cascade of illnesses, as happens to older people, and she was here for a whole year. And she was in a convalescent hospital and recovering slightly. And her caregiver said to me, if you could get her home now, her mentality would improve. She would know where she is. So I did it. And the medical transport that we took from Greenbrae Convalescent Hospital to Palm Springs, California, had quite a driver. And the next poem is about the driver of that medical transport. The poem Geronimo is written at 70 miles per hour with the second driver up front. And he, yes, that's really his name, Geronimo, black hair combed smoothly back from his brow, think crow's wing in the wind here, bends over my mother in the ambulance to change her diaper, returning her home from the hospitals of the north to die in the desert, her own bit of heaven, couch by the TV, bed by the white curtained window, rabbits under the yellow lounge chairs, a glimpse of the orange tree laden through patio windows. She can see me reading in the living room under the yellow rain of the lamp in my favorite chair. I can see her reading in her bed by the yellow rain of lamplight. The poem Geronimo is written at 70 miles an hour. He answers, think the essence of upright kindness here. I've got babies. I'm used to diapers, to her questioning look, speeding past almond orchards in full bloom. Is this really happening to me? And this young man with the movie star face is changing my diaper? At 70 miles per hour without losing balance, without bumping his head on the overhanging glass full of life-saving equipment, at 70 without losing humane dignity, rolling his 93-year-old patient back and forth as the job demands. And then 10 minutes later, when the infected bladder squirts, returning with a joke and a smile to do it again. Think angel here, a term I do not use lightly. Asking me, meanwhile, if I'm okay as we speed past the hawk poised on its fence post, listening in the crosswinds of the cars swooping down on the little rustling being under the grass to take her, while the light of love shines out of the eyes of all of us. Geronimo. On the dumping of pianos. This is the poem that Robert said he read several times before he designed the cover. There are two, well, no, not this one. To be honest with you, the guys enjoy it. They try so hard all day not to scratch anything, and all of a sudden, they get to throw it off the truck. Brian Goodwin, Piano Mover, The New York Times, July 30th, 2014. So some of them land with their legs in the air, I'm told. Although I haven't seen it, some let out a whole symphony of wailing, bang, bang, as they're tossed. And some get the axe, their dark cabinets burned up for firewood. There's a huge metal stove, too, that can demolish them. Firebirds of smoke billowing out. I imagine Sviatostruck Richters of heat melting their keys, curling their strings. Thus, I wanted my mother's body watched from the moment they tied the numbered tag around her white ankle that I would never see again. I even signed papers in advance for such a watcher, Shomer, as he is called in Hebrew. But when the time came, no one could be found in the entire Coachella Valley. Bang, bang, crash, crash, as chord after chord went off in the darkened hospital room. Crash, bang, crash, my fingers punching number after number on my cell phone as she lay after her last Shema, dressed in the gown of red and pink flannel roses I had stitched by hand and her granddaughter had seamed with a lime green grosgrain ribbon. The funeral home director thanked me for the pretty gown, it being hard to sit in a room with someone else's mother, as he offered to do until I could return and relieve him. Bang, crash, the room so silent. Crash, 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 the baby grands, the uprights, music stilled in them forever. The Shomer coming at last down Highway 10 from LA with a pocket full of songs to relieve me late the next afternoon. My last sight of her in light-filled room, my last kiss over flannel and roses, not willing, not able ever to imagine that kind of ruin for someone so upright, so grand. This is the title poem. It's called Bye Bye Blackbird. In the last days, you seemed younger, flamboyant, dashing around the halls in your wheelchair at the desert hospital, wearing that cherry blossom print kimono I found for you with your favorite caregiver, a young Filipino nurse who, after you were deeply attached to him, left suddenly for a better job. Bye bye, Blackbird, he sang out, lips dark pink, eyes all blue. Pack up all my cares and woes. Here I go, swinging low. As you went inward, days, nights. So make my bed and light the light. I'll arrive late tonight. I couldn't see in, but I could hear you. And all through the desert night on your last ride, you continued, passing cactus, passing sage, your last instructions clear in my ear. You're the one to be sure I look right in the carriage, honey. All the way down Ramon Road, past Date Palm Drive into Cathedral City where the cemetery lives. Stoplights, go lights, with a wave of your white gloved hand, a Lisa Minnelli smile, black cane tucked under your armpit. I said, Blackbird, oh Blackbird, bye-bye. You'll pardon me. So the last poem I'll read is about a piano competition. And it's called Claire de Lune. She's the last to play in a field of 10, 3 judges tabled before the baby grand piano, and past the immediate curtain of pure tension, hanging ivy is moving against the wall of windows through which can be seen far off a man, calmly seated on a stone ledge, his back to us, and facing an expanse of the light-soaked San Francisco Bay. She executes a crisp bow in a black suit and floral tie, cuffs rolled back over jacket sleeves, presenting her small hands to the gleaming keys. A moment of silence to connect with the spirit of the composer a sharp intake of breath, a whispered pow, and Claude Debussy fills the room, presses against the church windows, the rustling leaves fluttering against them, beyond the wide water trembling. My mother, who's been gone 5 years now, soars into the room in cream flannel, coral roses on wings of a moonlit sadness, the music now pouring out of the black instrument at the touch of her great-granddaughter's hands. The man begins to levitate slightly off the wall of stone, the water before him crashing in green waves against an invisible shore. There's perfume in the air, a faraway look as the sapphire eyes of the piano player search the invisible shore, the gleaming shore, threshold, majesty, a small golden crown settling into her short blonde hair as great-grandmother circles above her in the moonlight, cream flannel, coral roses, and slowly vanishes. The man is high over the water now. He lifts one hand, palm open, toward the glittering, light-soaked bay above which a blue moon is slowly risen. Ah, his favorite perfume, and we can smell it. I'd like to thank all of you for coming this afternoon, and a special thanks to Shawn and Robert for producing this beautiful book. Thank you so much.
Oh, Doreen, that was stunning. The relationship between mother and daughter is such a sacred one. And these poems of yours detailing so many different aspects of that relationship in her last days. It's so human, it's so real, it's so full of heart, it's so full of love. I'm touched by it every time I read it. Now hearing you read them, it's that much more impacting, and I'm gonna have to call my mom tomorrow. So thank you for this. It was really beautiful.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you to all of our fantastic poets tonight. And thank you for joining us for another edition of the Poetry Box Live. As poets and authors have been impacted by the closure of bookstores and reading venues across the country, it really means the world to us that you joined us here on Zoom to celebrate their poetry. Next month, our show will be on Saturday, April 10th at 4 p.m. Pacific. And our featured poets will be David Belmont from New York, Sally Naylor from Florida, and Penelope Scambly-Schott from here in Oregon. To keep up to date on upcoming shows, new releases, and submission opportunities, please subscribe to our newsletter by going to thepoetrybox.com, where you'll find a sign-up form at the bottom of each webpage. So thanks again for joining us today. You guys can all unmute yourselves and chat with the poets and ask them questions. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and we'll see you next month.
That was wonderful. All of you were great. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you so much. You guys were wonderful.
No, I enjoyed it all. I really appreciate it. And I know Doreen well, and I really admired the cover of her book very much. So you do a great job over there. So thank you, Shawn.
Thanks, Laurel. We love what we do.
It's obvious.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you next month.